Hello, everyone. Welcome to this next episode of our expert discussions on data as the fourth pillar. Today, we are very happy and fortunate to have with us Seth. So, welcome Seth to our discussions, and maybe if you can kick it off by introducing yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Seth Earley, and I'm founder and CEO of Early Information Science. We are a professional services firm who have been in this space for coming up on, well, actually surpassing 30 years. He started in 1994, and I've been around the AI space, around the data space. I co-authored a book in 1998 on Lotus and IBM's first foray into machine learning and AI. And that was something called Lotus Discovery Server that became IBM OmniFind, and that DNA went into Watson. So I'm very familiar with the space and have been around for a long time. Not a newly minted AI person, but I also have never considered ourselves an AI company. I've always considered ourselves an IA company, information architecture. And I wrote an article back in 2016 called There's No AI Without IA. There's no artificial intelligence without information architecture, which has become a little bit of an industry catchphrase. It's easy to remember, and people quote it and refer to it, and it's kind of sums it all up. There's no artificial intelligence without information architecture. At the foundation, that is data and data quality and an understanding of that data and structuring that data and that content. And I also wrote a book back in 2020 called The AI Powered Enterprise. And it was really all about ontologies and knowledge graphs and how to build that knowledge and data scaffolding for the organization to power different types of AI applications. And so that was before large language models were prevalent and before ChatGPT. But everything in that book is still valid, right? When I first saw ChatGPT, I was like, I had an existential crisis. Is my work no longer necessary? And then I realized it's more necessary than ever because the data is more important than ever, which tees up our conversation here about data as the fourth pillar. It really has to be there, and without it, these systems will not function, will not operate. And there's too many people that think that, oh, the AI will do it all. Well, the AI can help, but you still need to do a lot with not manual processes, but curation and human processes, right? And human in the loop processes and human judgment and so on, and human leadership, right? All of those things are really important. And again, it's in order to make AI work, we need to have the data and we need to have the content and the knowledge.
Yeah, I think Seth, you framed it so nicely and set the background of it. So few things I noted it out from your introduction is that AI is not new. It has been
Sure.
there for so many years back. It's just the hype has caught up with the LLMs, and basically it has become democratized. So it is on the fingertips of a consumer, if I may say so. That's why it has become the importance. But AI has been there, and so for that, data has also been there. Organizations have been working with data for so long. That's also not a new topic. But then why this book, and that Sid and I have been working on that. In our experience working with so many companies, we still see companies, when even though they're acknowledging the importance of data for not only AI, for other initiatives, they then struggle on the execution of it. We see chief data officers coming in, staying there for 2 to 3 years, then they just roll over to a new job.
Yeah.
Companies putting in money and not able to execute, right?
Right, right.
So
And you make a good point about the chief data officers that come in the door. And one of the things that's important to understand is that for many organizations, they're not even, they're acknowledging data is important, but they're not really understanding it. They'll say, "Oh yeah, data is important," but when you show them the price tag or what it's going to take to invest in it, they're like, "Well, it's not that important," right? But then they'll pouring all this money into AI and generative AI, but not realizing or understanding how much needs to go in at the foundation for data and data quality. And so you get different types of CDOs that come into an organization. Sorry, I got a cat in the background here. You see different types of helping me with my work. We see different types of CDOs come in the door, some of whom are more evangelist, right? And they'll say, data is important, and get everybody around the table nodding their heads and getting the executives bought into it. that is an evangelist perspective, but it's not an execution perspective. Then when it comes time to execute, you really need a different type of CDO who can roll up their sleeves and get in the weeds and get people to execute. But if you're not at that point where people are really understanding the importance of this, and you bring in that person who can execute, they're going to fail because the organization isn't ready. It's not mature enough. But then if you have someone who if you're giving someone who is an evangelist and you're saying, okay, we all get it, now execute. Many times those people will fail because they're not the right person to do the execution. So many times you need very different leadership depending upon the organizational maturity.
Yeah, and to this point, Seth, I mean, our perspectives are very much aligned, but of course, we bring different flavors to that. The way we've thought about this is very much to your point. We need different flavors of CDO, but
Mhm.
also for helping CDOs, we need certain frameworks so that they can help go beyond data underneath a process, underneath the
Yep.
technology, or underneath people, because that's what we are seeing a lot, that data is sandwiched today between one of these other operating pillars. And the way we did it in a high level is also to focus on the demand side of it, because I think we've talked a lot about the execution, which is more from the supply side of things. But from a demand side of things, how does the CDO pick the right initiatives, the business initiatives to tackle? And here we've framed a framework to look at three dimensions of data, which we call as data intensity. So we look
Mhm.
at the quality of data, which you alluded to quite a bit in your introduction and in the last passage. Of course, quality can be different for different business initiatives depending on the nature and the type of consumer, the type of use case you're serving. We also then have compliance depending on the type of industry and enterprises. Internal or external compliances may play a big role. For instance, we are in the Europe, and EU has a lot of regulations also from a AI perspective, but also from GDPR perspective and other perspectives. So there's a compliance angle to it. But at the same time, there's a speed angle to it, which is our third dimension of QCS, which is speed. Because with AI and with also the consumers requiring the data yesterday in most cases, speed is becoming critical. But then again, speed could be different for different initiatives. Maybe still for a marketing initiative or a marketing campaign, you might still require batch data to be delivered, whereas for a real time AI use case, perhaps for credit card fraud detection or something, you require real time data. So that's why we've devised these kind of three pillars for CDOs to measure how their supply should be depending on different use cases having different intensities. So your perspectives on that, sir?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point, right? Because different applications will have different, data requirements in terms of the freshness and the speed and the responsiveness. And, if you have an agentic framework and it's taking, 5 minutes to go off and execute, right? That's not a good response time for, a consumer or a business person trying to interact with that data, when they need an immediate answer. And so, we do need to think about, the nature of the process and how what the responsiveness needs to be. And the compliance piece is always very important. And I also think of security in the context or compliance in the context of security, right? Because we need to security trim content and data and information wherever we're presenting it. So we need to think of that at a foundational level rather than trying to think about, security and compliance after the fact. So I think all of these things are important. The data quality needs to be measured in multiple ways, and as you say, different applications will have different quality requirements, right? If it's something that's in a regulated industry and you have certain responsibilities and you cannot afford hallucinations or you cannot afford inaccuracies, that's a higher bar than you say a marketing campaign that is going to be, that's going to have a little bit more leeway. Again, there could be compliance around that as well, but it's a good framework because again, it helps organizations understand, how they need to think about that data. And I also like to think of this in the context of use cases. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? And then what are the components to your your data quality, your data compliance, and the speed at which that data needs to be apprehended or consumed or provided, right? And so that is foundational to what do you need to accomplish, right? What is that? What at the end of the day? what are your users going in and doing, and how do you measure good, right? How does this, what's going to satisfy your users and your requirements, and what does success look like, right? The use cases need to be very clear, very concrete, very specific, very unambiguous, and then you can apply the framework to evaluating those use cases and then seeing what other pieces you need to bring to the table in order to meet those requirements.
Yep. So, and that's also challenging because unless a CDO or that organizations have understanding of the demand and this variety in QCS, and if you then just do a cookie cutter approach, then you are either under investing or over investing, right? You might be investing for high QCS in all dimensions, but many of your use case might
Right.
need low QCS. So then
Right.
you will not be able to achieve the returns. And now, if we can segue to the next steps at even understanding this, what is
But
the
by the
practice?
way, I like to call that make the punishment fit the crime, right? In other
Okay.
words, make
Yeah.
sure you're doing what's appropriate for your application. Anyway,
Exactly. Exactly. Otherwise, you are walking in a blindfolded in a forest, right? You never know where you're going, right? And
yeah.
now, if we then pivot to the next part, is how do you seeing organizations preparing towards this? Say you are an executive, a board, or a CX. You understand data is important. You understand all this intensity requirement. How do you go about executing the journey? Because and different organizations, different. We are talking about large organizations who traditionally move slower versus a
Mhm.
nimble organizations, and making this change to establish another pillar of the operating model, it's not a simple click of a button. So I think
Mhm.
any experience on the
Sure.
maturity that and the journey for that?
Sure. So it really becomes about the clock speed of the process and the application. So when you look at how quickly data moves and how quickly things change, for a customer facing marketing type of application where you're interacting on social media and you're responding real time to people, that's going to have a very high clock speed, right? It's going to move very quickly. It's going to evolve quickly. It's going to change quickly. If you go to the other end of the spectrum and you look at ERP systems are stable. They're not evolving quickly. They don't have that high velocity of change. Some of the data may move at a high velocity, but for the most part, you're stable and you're structured and you're not. It's not going to be easy to evolve that system and change that system very, very quickly. So there's clock speeds of organizations, there's clock speeds of departments, there's clock speeds of applications, there's clock speeds around data, and you have to think about these multiple dimensions when you're trying to affect change, right? You need to think about the timeline. If you're trying to go through a maturity curve and trying to improve a level of maturity, and you take any typical five-stage maturity model, where stage one is a lack of process, a lack of maturity, chaos or no governance or little control, versus stage five is content and data nirvana. To go from one stage to another can take 6 months or a year, right? Depending upon those different parameters and the size of the organization. So when you're looking at doing these things, you have to look at, well, what does the maturity of the process require? What is the maturity that the industry requires? What is the maturity that that competitors, where competitors are at, right? So you have to benchmark your maturity and your capabilities against these different parameters. What do customers expect? What are competitors doing? What is the market doing? And so on. And so when you start looking at your use case and say, well, that use case is going to require that we're at a higher level of maturity than we are today. Let's say we're at stage two in some particular area like governance or information architecture. And there's lots of different dimensions around maturity, right? And and maturity is lumpy, right? It's not evenly distributed. You have parts of the organization that are doing things really well and parts of the organization that are not doing things very well. And part of it is smoothing that out. So maturity overall, is very heterogeneous. But the point is that you're trying to say, well, what's our future state going to look like? And then what are the use cases that are part of that future state? What are people going to do? What are those capabilities? And then what level of maturity is required to get to to satisfy that use case, to build that capability, to satisfy those users. And then you have to start saying, okay, where are we today? And if we're in stage two in some area and we need to be in stage four, doesn't mean you need to be in stage five for everything, right? Depending upon what you're trying to do. But it's not a 6 month, $50,000 project, right?
No.
Or 6 week, $50,000 project or whatever it is. I mean, it's going to take time. It's going to take resources. It's going to take bandwidth and attention of the organization. So we really have to be able to understand where we are today in terms of maturity. What is that baseline? What are the characteristics? And then what are the characteristics of an improved or increased or new level of maturity? And then what characteristics do we need to support that future state? And then thinking about that, how do I get through that maturity? How do I build those capabilities? And if it is part of a core competence or a competitive differentiator, you can't really outsource that, right? You can't outsource your core competency. So you have to build those capabilities, and that means upskilling people. That means building new infrastructure. And of course, all of this is changing so quickly that you have to balance the speed of change or the rate of change with the ability to absorb change.
Yeah.
And for most large organizations, it's very difficult to absorb on the business side, on the technology side, right? And on the process side. But today, our technologies are moving so rapidly and changing so quickly that the thing that you absolutely have to work on, and it is incumbent upon you to build this for every scenario, every application, is that data foundation, right? So we know everything is changing very quickly. We can't absorb all that change, but we do need to have good data. So that is something we can focus on as a foundation. And for many of the customers we're working with right now, we're building those foundation for them, right? We're building the infrastructure and the architecture and the pieces that need to go into lots of other applications. And then you have to have the ability to switch in and out different language models, different algorithms, different best of breed or best of industry or best, practice in a particular area. But again, what's going to stay what requirement or what detail is going to be consistent across all of those areas? The data, right? The data quality, the data consistency, the data architecture, the data structure, the data ownership, the data governance, right? The data lifecycle. All of those things are critically important to support any scenario, any technology stack. It doesn't matter, right? But if you start building things for a particular silo or a particular application or in a particular manner where you're locked into some vendor application, you get vendor lock-in, you many times get more cost and less agility and adaptability. Now, when you have, say, a composable architecture, and you still need the data to be able to be plugged into these different areas, but you're going to trade off, stability and a lot of other pieces that are part of a single platform because you need to trade off stability for adaptability, but adaptability may have more costs in some cases, but it has more complexity. But again, coming back to this, the foundation of data, it's the same no matter what you're doing. You need that foundation, you need that structure, you need that life cycle, you need that quality. So organizations, if they have no idea where they need to spend their time or energy, they should be focusing on getting the data right for particular use cases, for particular scenarios, and being able to build that roadmap for execution based on those scenarios, right? You need to take kind of a broad perspective when you're building things like a domain model that are very broad and very shallow. But then you dig very deeply into specific applications and specific use cases in order to rectify and remediate and update the data for those particular applications. So it becomes an incremental approach. You need to look at things holistically, but you can't expand your scope so broadly that it's boiling the ocean, right? But there are ways to balance the level of granularity, get that big picture perspective, get that holistic view, but at the same time be able to dive in very deeply and get to that specific application and that specific functionality that you need.
Exactly. Well said, Seth. Very well said. So I think just to summarize what you covered through means you've been talking about the processes. Yeah, there's a people aspect to it, there's a technology aspect to it. So this is how we have structured a maturity framework in our book, and I will let readers to read it when it comes out. But how organizations could mature along the people, process, technology, to mature their data pillar. So it's then becomes a more of a symbiotic relationship connecting the pillar thought that data not only provides to people, process, and technology, but the people, the processes, and the technologies must be also set up for your data foundation for the data pillar. So that's how we are kind of mature the data pillar. Mhm.
Yep. Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so and we'll let readers read the book and double click on it and learn from it. There's a lot more frameworks. But Seth, maybe if you can try to now conclude the discussion in the interest of time. See, AI has been there for long. The data has been also there for long. And then when we are talking about data as a fourth pillar, one question that has come to sits in my mind and try to why, what is the urgency to act? Why
Mm.
must enterprises do it right now? Any thoughts on
Yeah.
that side, Seth?
Yeah. Well, I think many organizations are realizing, understanding that that AI is impacting every part of the enterprise and reinventing industries. And, organizations are trying to figure out how to use it effectively. And, we were brought into a recent client engagement where we're building a roadmap. And one of the things they wanted to do is, well, how do we use LLMs and how do we use ChatGPT? And is it better to use Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT? Well, what should we be doing in that area? And to me, that was a little bit of a that wasn't necessarily the right question, right? The right question was, how do we get our data infrastructure aligned to support many different applications down the road? And so the urgency here is not just using the impressive capabilities. And by the way, generative AI blows my mind every day. Like every day I give it stuff to do and I'm astounded, right? It's just so mind-bogglingly good. Um, but it misses the point. It's not about generating the answers based on the LLM's understanding of the world. It's about generating the answers based on your understanding of the world and your data and your perspective and your content and your differentiators, right? If you do what everybody else does, you get efficiency, but you don't get competitive advantage. Competitive advantage comes from differentiation. Differentiation comes from your knowledge of customers, of solutions, of markets, of routes to market, of channels, of problems, and so on. And so what we need to do is increase that urgency around getting the data infrastructure in shape so we can leverage generative AI to make the organization more efficient, to speed the information metabolism of the organization, get information for everybody more quickly. And again, that is where the real value is. Where the real value comes from querying and processing your information and letting the large language model interpret the user's question, understand their intent, and then make that answer more conversational. But it has to be based on your data. So in order to get value from this long term, even short term, the data has to be there. And this is so urgent because otherwise competitors are doing this are going to blow your doors off, right? They're going to eat your lunch. They're going to produce things faster, better, cheaper. And in some cases, there's not going to be any catching up. It's going to be existential for many organizations. So if you don't do this, you may not be around in 5 years, right? And if you do this, you can take market share, you can increase the value of your organization, you can gain customers, you can build new products, new offerings, all sorts of things. But you can't do it if you don't pay attention to this and pay attention to it now. So that is why the urgency is today. It has to be done now.
Oh, that was amazing insights. I mean, for more such insights, Seth, how do people reach out to you? How do they get to know much of these knowledge that you've shared today?
Sure. So the website is early.com, but it's spelled in an unusual way. It's Earley. Don't forget the E before the Y. I say that to people and they write it down Early. As I'm saying, don't forget the E before the Y. So I'm Seth at early.com, my first name at lastname.com. But go to the website, early.com. We have our podcast, which is one of the top 50 podcasts in the world on AI and machine learning. I just was given that designation. I don't know what it means, but that's what they said. So we have wonderful guests on that. You guys should be guests on it. That's a great source. We have webinars, we have white papers, we have reports, we have my book. So take a look at the website, and if you send me a note, I can get you an electronic version of the book at no cost. And again, everything in that book is valid today, as more valid today. Somebody said my article from 2016 said this is more important today than it was in 2016. You can look for that as well. It's called "There's No AI Without IA." You can do a search and find that. But you can also check me on LinkedIn. Again, I'm just Seth Earley, Seth Early, Earley. Look forward to connecting with people and having these conversations. I enjoy this stuff and happy to discuss and chat.
Thank you very much, Seth. And any closing thoughts about the book, Data as the Fourth Pillar? How do you feel
No,
about the topic?
it's a great approach. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a good handbook for for navigating this space these days. And I think it's important for every executive to understand these issues.
Good, great. Thanks a lot, Seth, for your recommendations.
You
And
bet. Thank you for having me. Nice to chat with you.
Appreciate it.
yeah, take care. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.